Say it again. My brother laughed, lifting his glass. You're a nurse, Katherine, not a doctor. Let's not pretend you're saving the world. No one stopped him. Not my mother, not my father. Just quiet smiles and lowered eyes. I felt my phone vibrate under the table. A message flashed, final audit file confirmed. Executive review complete. My stomach tightened, because that file had my name in it. And his. Before I could respond, the doorbell rang. My father opened it and suddenly stepped aside. Dr. Olivia Bennett, the hospital director, walked in like she already knew exactly where to look, and she was smiling at me. If you're watching from outside the US, tell me where you're from and what time it is where you are. And if you've ever been underestimated by your own family, I think you'll understand why I didn't say a word that night. Don't forget to subscribe. You won't want to miss what happened next. 2 weeks before Christmas, the ICU felt like it always did this time of year, overloaded, understaffed, and running on a kind of quiet endurance that never made it into hospital brochures. I had just come off a 12-hour shift that stretched closer to 14. Monitors beeped in uneven rhythms, ventilators hissed steadily, and every nurse on the floor moved with that same focused urgency you only learn after years of doing the job. People like my brother thought nursing was just following orders. They didn't see the decisions we made every hour, who needed attention first, which symptom didn't match the chart when something fell off before it became an emergency. That night, something did feel off. I was reviewing staffing logs before handing over to the night team. It was routine checking who clocked in, who stayed late, making sure coverage matched patient acuity. But one name caught my eye. Lydia Torres. She was marked as having worked a double shift in ICU 16 hours straight, except I'd been there all day, and Lydia hadn't. I frowned, scrolling back through the schedule. Maybe I missed her? Maybe she floated between units. But no, there was no sign-in badge record for her entry, no note in the shift report, no handoff comments, nothing. Hey, I called to Marcus, one of the charge nurses, finishing his notes. Did Lydia come in today? He barely looked up. Not that I saw. Why, she's logged for a double. That got his attention. He leaned over my shoulder, squinting at the screen. That's weird. Maybe admin input error, I said, though something about it didn't feel accidental. Marcus shrugged. Happens. System's been glitchy lately, maybe. But I'd worked with that system for years. It didn't randomly generate 16-hour shifts. I flagged it mentally and kept moving. But it wasn't the only thing. Later, while reconciling supply usage, I noticed another inconsistency. We had documented usage of specialized IV kits, high-cost ones, reserved for critical cases. According to the system, we had gone through 12 kits that day. I counted 6. Not estimated. Counted. I walked back into the supply room and checked again, slower this time. Each bin, each labeled drawer, 6 kits used, the rest untouched. I pulled up patient records. Only 5 patients even qualified for those kits. So where did the other 6 go, or more accurately, where did the billing say they went? I leaned against the counter, arms crossed, staring at the screen. Hospitals didn't just lose track of equipment like that. Everything was documented, audited, justified. At least it was supposed to be. Katherine. I turned. It was Denise, one of the senior nurses. She had been in the ICU longer than I had, and she carried herself like someone who had seen every version of chaos this place could produce. You heading out? She asked. In a minute, I said. Then hesitating, I added, Can I ask you something? She nodded. I turned the screen slightly toward her. Does this look right to you? She scanned the numbers quickly. Her expression didn't change much, but I noticed the pause. That's not your lane, she said finally. I'm not trying to make it my lane, I replied. I just noticed it. Denise looked around, making sure no one else was close enough to overhear. Then she leaned in slightly. Let me give you some advice, she said quietly. When something doesn't make sense here, ask yourself one question. I waited. Is it your job to fix it? I didn't answer. She straightened. Because if it's not you, let it go. That doesn't sit right with me, I said. She gave me a small, tired smile. It doesn't sit right with anyone. That's not the point. I studied her face. You've seen this before. Denise didn't confirm it, but she didn't deny it either. Just, be careful, she said. Things that don't make sense usually make sense to someone higher up. She walked away before I could ask anything else. I stood there for a moment, the hum of machines filling the silence she left behind. Then I turned back to the screen. Lydia Torres, 16 hours logged, 12 IV kits billed, 6 actually used. I opened the reporting panel and pulled historical data. If this was a glitch, it would be random. If it wasn't, I scrolled back 3 days. Same pattern, different names, inflated hours, over-reported supplies, always just enough to look like normal fluctuation unless you were paying attention. My chest tightened. This wasn't a mistake. It was a system, and someone was counting on no one looking closely enough to notice. I exported the logs into a private file and saved it under a neutral name. Not hidden, just not obvious. Then I opened the internal reporting dashboard. That's when I saw it. A file tagged at the top of the system, executive access only, pending review. It hadn't been there the day before. No author listed, no department attached, just a locked icon next to the title. I hovered over it, my cursor freezing midair. Something about it felt connected. Like all the inconsistencies I had just found were only a small piece of something bigger already in motion. I clicked. Access denied. Of course. I leaned back slowly in my chair, exhaling through my nose. Denise's words echoed in my head. Is it your job to fix it? I looked at the screen again, then at the exported file I had just saved, then back at the locked report. Maybe it wasn't my job, but I was already in it. And whatever was inside that file, it was close enough to reach. I didn't open the file again that night. Not because I wasn't curious, but because I knew curiosity without a plan could get me in trouble faster than anything else. Instead, I went home, took a shower that lasted longer than it should have, and sat on the edge of my bed staring at my phone. There was one person I trusted to help me think this through without turning it into something reckless. Maya Collins. We met during my second year as a nurse back when she was working IT support for the hospital network. She had since moved into a healthcare systems firm, but she still understood how hospital data moved and, more importantly, how it could be manipulated without technically breaking any rules. I texted her. You up? She called me instead. That tone already sounds like trouble, she said the second I picked up. I need a second pair of eyes, I said, not hacking, just logic. There was a pause. Okay, she said carefully. What kind of logic? The kind where numbers don't add up, but they're trying very hard to look like they do. That got her attention. Send me what you have. I transferred a small portion of the logs I'd exported, nothing patient identifiable, nothing that would cross a line, just timestamps, staffing records, and supply usage reports. Maya didn't speak for a minute. I could hear typing on her end, fast and focused. Then she exhaled. Yeah, this isn't random. I didn't think so. You see this, she said. These edits, they're not overwriting data. They're layering on top of it. What does that mean in plain English? It means the original entries were correct. Then someone came in later and adjusted them, but instead of replacing the data, they appended new values with updated approvals, so the system shows the final version as legitimate. Exactly. And unless you dig into version history, it looks clean. I leaned back against the wall, closing my eyes for a second. So someone is inflating numbers after the fact. Looks like it. Carefully, though. Not enough to trigger automatic flags. That's what I noticed, I said. It's subtle. Spread out. Yeah, Maya replied. This isn't sloppy. Whoever's doing this understands how audits work. That made my stomach tighten, because it meant intent. Not error. Not oversight. Design. Can you trace who made the edits, I asked. Not directly, she said, but I can see which accounts approve them. Another pause. More typing. Okay. This is interesting. What these approvals are tied to a vendor interface. I don't know what that means. It means some of these changes aren't coming from inside the hospital system directly. They're being pushed through an external contract platform. I frowned. Like a supplier, or a consulting firm managing supply chain or staffing optimization. That made sense? Hospitals often outsourced parts of their operations, especially cost management. Do you see a name, I asked? Hold on. I could hear her clicking opening cross-referencing. Then, Katherine. Something in her voice shifted. What I need you to tell me, this is a coincidence. My grip tightened around the phone. Just say it. The vendor attached to most of these approvals is Reynolds Strategic Solutions. For a second, I didn't respond. I didn't need to ask who owned it. I already knew. Daniel had been talking about it for months. His consulting firm, his big contracts, his healthcare expansion. I swallowed slowly. Say that again, I said, even though I'd heard it clearly. Reynolds Strategic Solutions, Maya repeated. That's the vendor pushing these updates. I stood up without realizing it, pacing across my apartment. No, I said under my breath. No, that doesn't make sense. It might not be what you think, Maya said quickly. It could just be he's been bragging about landing a hospital contract I cut in, said it was his biggest one yet. Maya went quiet. Okay, she said after a moment, then it might be exactly what you think. I pressed my hand against my forehead. Daniel wasn't careless. He was ambitious, calculated, obsessed with proving he was the smartest person in any room. But fraud, that was a different line. Can you show me the contract, I asked. I don't have full access, Maya said. But I can pull references tied to these entries. A few seconds later, my phone buzzed with a forwarded document. I opened it. It wasn't the full contract, just a summary page from the vendor system, but it was enough. Vendor Reynolds Strategic Solutions Service category, cost optimization and resource efficiency approval chain, multi-department contract value, confidential, and then near the bottom, authorized representative Daniel Reynolds. My brother's name stared back at me like it didn't belong there. But it did. Of course it did. I sank onto the couch, the weight of it settling in slowly. This doesn't prove fraud, Maya said carefully. It proves involvement. It proves access, I said. Which is worse, because access meant opportunity, and opportunity paired with inflated numbers and layered edits. It painted a picture I didn't want to finish. Do you want to walk away from this? Maya asked. I didn't answer right away. I thought about Christmas dinner, about Daniel's voice filling the room, confident and untouchable, about the way my parents looked at him like everything he did was justified as long as it brought success. Then I thought about the patients, the ones whose care depended on accurate staffing, the ones whose bills reflected those inflated supplies. I opened the document again, zooming in on the approval section. There were multiple sign-offs, departments, names. And then one more line caught my attention. Supporting documentation attached restricted access. There's more, I said quietly. Of course there is, Maya replied. Something attached to this contract. Something I can't see. Probably internal reports, she said. Or audit prep files. My eyes drifted back to the system I had left open earlier that night in the hospital. Executive access only, pending review. My pulse slowed not from calm, but from clarity. That locked file at work, I said. It's connected to this. Sounds like it, Maya said. If I can get access to it legitimately, you'll see the full picture, she finished. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. For the first time, everything aligned. The inflated hours, the over-reported supplies, the vendor approvals, Daniel's contract, and a locked report already waiting at the top of the system. This wasn't something I had discovered early. This was something already under review, which meant one thing. Someone else knew, and they were getting ready to act. I looked down at my phone again at Daniel's name sitting there in black and white. Not as my brother, but as part of a system that didn't make sense until it did. I'm not walking away, I said finally. Maya didn't try to stop me this time. Then be careful, she said, because if this is as big as it looks... She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. I already understood. Because whatever was inside that locked file, it wasn't just about numbers anymore. It was about who was going to take the fall. I didn't sleep much that night. It wasn't just the numbers or the contract with Daniel's name on it. It was the realization that everything I had been taught to ignore every time I was told to stay in my lane had quietly built into something real. And now I couldn't unsee it. The next morning I went to work like nothing had changed. Same routine, same scrubs, same steady rhythm of the ICU. But internally, everything felt sharper. Every chart I reviewed, every supply count, every shift log, I saw patterns where before I might have seen noise. And I wasn't the only one who noticed things. I just might have been the only one still willing to look. Around noon, I passed by the staff lounge and overheard two nurses talking in low voices. I'm telling you something's off with the billing lately. Don't say that out loud. I'm serious. My cousin got charged for stuff that... Just drop it, okay? They went quiet when they saw me. I didn't stop walking, but it confirmed something. I wasn't alone in sensing it. People knew, or at least suspected. They just didn't want to be the one holding the thread that unraveled everything. Later that afternoon, I checked my email. There it was. Subject internal audit review. Attendance requested. No details, no attachments, just a time. A conference room and a short line at the bottom. Your presence is required. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Required, not optional. That meant I wasn't just someone who had noticed irregularities. I was now part of the process, and that changed the risk completely. I forwarded the email to Maya. Her reply came within minutes. That's not informal anymore. I know, I typed back. You still have your documentation, everything. Good. Don't rely on memory. Stick to what you can prove. I leaned back in my chair. That was the part people didn't understand about situations like this. It wasn't about what you believed. It was about what you could show step by step without leaving room for interpretation. And I had been careful. Every note I took had timestamps. Every inconsistency I flagged was backed by records, not assumptions. Not opinions, facts. Still, one question kept circling in my mind. How deep did this go? Because if Daniel's company was involved, then someone inside the hospital had to be approving it. And that someone wasn't careless. They were methodical. That evening after my shift, I drove to my parents' house. I didn't tell them I was coming. I just needed to see Daniel, to hear him talk about his work again without him knowing what I knew. He was already there when I walked in, sitting comfortably on the couch, phone in hand, like he owned the place. Hey, he said casually. Didn't expect you. Yeah, I replied. Just finished a shift. My mom came out of the kitchen smiling. You should have called. I would have made more food. I'm fine, I said. My dad nodded from his chair, barely looking up from the TV. Same dynamic. Nothing new. Daniel leaned back, stretching his arms. You look tired. 12-hour shift, I said. He smirked. Rough. You know you wouldn't have to wear yourself down like that if you went into administration or something. Bigger picture. Better money. I watched him for a second. Like what you do, I asked. Exactly like what I do, he said a little too quickly. I walked further into the room, setting my bag down. What is it you do exactly, I asked, keeping my tone neutral. He grinned. Consulting. Efficiency cost optimization, that kind of thing. For hospitals, among other things. I nodded slowly. So you help them save money. Not just save, he said. Reallocate. Make systems leaner. My mom chimed in from the kitchen. Daniel's doing very well for himself. Big contracts. I glanced at her. I've heard. Daniel sat forward slightly. It's about understanding where resources are being wasted. Most places don't even realize how much they're losing. And you help them see that I asked. Exactly. There was confidence in his voice. The kind that came from someone who believed they were smarter than the system they were working in. I held his gaze. And the hospitals just trust your numbers, he shrugged. They don't have a reason not to. Everything goes through proper channels. Approvals, documentation, all of it. Proper channels. Approvals. Documentation. The same words I had seen in those files. I nodded again, slower this time. Must be a lot of responsibility, I said. It is, he replied. But someone has to make the tough calls. Something in the way he said that didn't sit right. Not guilt. Not hesitation. Just certainty. Like whatever he was doing, he had already justified it. My dad finally looked over. Your brother's going places, he said. You should learn from him. I didn't respond, because for the first time I realized something that had never been this clear before. They weren't just proud of Daniel. They were invested in him, in his success, in what he represented, which meant if something about him didn't add up, they might not want to see it either. I picked up my bag. I should get going, I said. So soon, my mom asked. Early shift tomorrow? Daniel leaned back again, relaxed. Try not to work too hard, he said. Wouldn't want you burning out over something that's not even worth it. I paused at the door. Not even worth it. I thought about the patients, the inflated bills, the missing supplies, the layered approvals, and the locked file waiting in the system. I turned back slightly. Yeah, I said quietly. Wouldn't want that. Then I left. The cold air hit me the second I stepped outside. I stood there for a moment, breathing it in, letting the silence settle around me. Daniel didn't think anything was wrong. Or if he did, he didn't think it mattered. And my parents, they weren't going to question him, not unless they were forced to. I got into my car and sat there, hands on the wheel, staring straight ahead. The audit meeting was tomorrow, and whatever was inside that room, whatever was inside that locked file, it was going to decide more than just numbers. It was going to decide who was responsible and who was replaceable. The conference room didn't look any different from the dozens of others I'd sat in before. Same long table, same neutral walls, same quiet hum of the ventilation system. But the atmosphere was completely different. This wasn't a routine meeting. There were no casual conversations, no coffee cups scattered around, no small talk before it began. Just a handful of people already seated, folders closed in front of them, expressions measured. Waiting. I recognized one of them immediately, the compliance officer who had emailed me. Next to him sat a woman I didn't know, likely from external audit. Across from them, two department heads I had only ever seen in passing. And at the far end of the table, Dr. Olivia Bennett. She didn't look up when I walked in. Ms. Reynolds, the compliance officer, said, gesturing toward an open seat. Thank you for coming. I nodded and sat down, placing my folder in front of me. No one spoke for a moment. Then Dr. Bennett closed the file she had been reviewing and finally looked up. Her eyes landed on me, steady, assessing, but not cold. Let's begin, she said. The compliance officer took over. This meeting is part of an internal audit review concerning discrepancies in staffing records and supply utilization within the ICU and associated departments. His tone was neutral, controlled. This is a fact-finding process. We are not here to assign conclusions prematurely. I appreciated that phrasing. It meant they were being careful, or that they already knew more than they were saying. We understand, he continued, that you identified irregularities in your routine review processes. I nodded. Yes. Can you walk us through what you observed? I opened my folder, slowly laying out the documents I had printed the night before. I started with staffing logs, I said. There were entries showing extended shifts for personnel who were not physically present. I slid one page forward. This example, 16 hours logged. No badge access, no handoff notes, no corroborating documentation. The external auditor leaned in slightly, scanning the page. "Did you verify with the individual listed?" she asked. "Yes," I said. She confirmed she wasn't on shift that day. A small note was made. "Go on." I turned to the next set of documents. Then I reviewed supply usage, I said, specifically high-cost IV kits. I pointed to the numbers. Reported usage exceeded actual usage by nearly double on multiple dates. "How did you confirm actual usage?" the department head asked. "Physical count and patient records," I said. "Only patients meeting specific criteria are eligible for those kits." The numbers didn't match. More notes. No interruptions. No one dismissed what I was saying, which told me something important. They had already seen enough to take this seriously. I took a breath and continued. These discrepancies were not isolated. They followed a pattern small enough to avoid automatic flags, but consistent over time. I slid the final document forward. This is a compiled timeline showing repeated instances across multiple days. The compliance officer studied it carefully. "Thank you," he said. "This is helpful." Helpful. Not surprising. Not new. Just helpful. That confirmed what I had started to suspect. I wasn't the first person to notice something was wrong. I was just the first one to document it clearly enough to be useful. Dr. Bennett spoke for the first time since the meeting began. "Ms. Reynolds." She said, her voice calm when you observe these inconsistencies. "What did you believe was the cause?" I held her gaze. "I didn't assume a cause," I said. "Only that the data didn't align with reality." A slight nod. "Good," she said. "Assumptions tend to complicate processes like this." There was a pause. Then the external auditor leaned forward. "We'd like to show you something," she said. She turned a document around and slid it toward me. I looked down. It was a summary of vendor-linked adjustments, numbers, dates, approval chains, and highlighted in the center, Reynolds Strategic Solutions. My chest tightened, but I didn't let it show. "This vendor appears repeatedly in the approval process for adjusted entries," she said. I nodded once. "I noticed that." "Do you have any professional or personal connection to this entity?" she asked. There it was, the moment I had been preparing for. I didn't rush my answer. "Yes," I said evenly. "The authorized representative listed is my brother." No one reacted dramatically. No sharp looks, no whispers, just acknowledgement, because they already knew. "Thank you for disclosing that," the compliance officer said. "It's important for transparency." Transparency. That word mattered here, because it separated me from the situation. It showed I wasn't hiding anything. I wasn't protecting anyone. I was stating facts. Dr. Bennett watched me closely. "Has your brother ever discussed the specifics of his work with this hospital?" she asked. "Not in detail," I said. "Only in general terms, consulting cost optimization." "Did he ever mention involvement with staffing or supply allocation?" "No." Another note. Then the compliance officer closed his folder. "There is one more area we need to address," he said. The room shifted slightly, not physically, but in tone, more focused, more precise. He reached for another document. This one wasn't turned toward me immediately. Instead, he spoke first. "Some of the adjusted entries appear to be linked to ICU reporting channels," he said, "which places your department within the approval flow." I felt it before I saw it. The shift in direction. Specifically, he continued, "There are records indicating that certain data points were finalized after passing through accounts associated with your unit." There it was, the setup, carefully phrased. Technically accurate, but incomplete. He slid the document toward me. I looked down. My name was there, not as the one who made the changes, but as part of the reporting chain. A timestamp, an approval marker, something that without context could be misinterpreted. I didn't react immediately. I read every line, every timestamp, every reference, and then I saw it. The gap, the difference between when the data was originally submitted and when it was modified. I looked up slowly. "That's not the full sequence," I said. The compliance officer met my gaze. "Explain." I slid my own document forward my timeline. The entries were submitted at these times, I said, pointing. By my account, as part of routine reporting. I moved my finger to the next column. These adjustments occurred later, after the data left our department. The external auditor leaned closer. You're saying the changes were made post-submission? Yes. And you can support that? I nodded, with timestamps, version history, and original entries that were not overwritten, only appended. Silence. Not uncertainty. Processing. Dr. Bennett spoke again. Do you have documentation of those original entries? I do, I said. I opened my folder and placed the final set of documents on the table. These are copies exported before any further modification. The compliance officer reviewed them carefully, then passed them to the auditor. No one spoke for a full 30 seconds, which in a room like that felt like minutes. Finally, the auditor looked up. This aligns with what we've been seeing, she said. Not a question, a confirmation. The compliance officer nodded slowly. Thank you, Ms. Reynolds, he said. This clarifies an important distinction. Clarifies, not resolves, not concludes, just clarifies. Because this wasn't over, not even close. Dr. Bennett closed her folder again, but this time when she looked at me, there was something different in her expression. Not just assessment, recognition. You've done exactly what you were supposed to do, she said. You observed, you documented, and you stayed within your scope. A pause. Most people don't. I didn't respond, because I wasn't thinking about recognition. I was thinking about what came next. Because if they were this careful, this deliberate, then whatever they were building toward, it was bigger than just correcting numbers. The compliance officer gathered the documents. We'll continue the review process, he said. You may be contacted again if further clarification is needed. I nodded. The meeting was over. Just like that. No conclusions announced. No decisions revealed. Just a quiet acknowledgement that the pieces were coming together. I stood up, collecting my folder. As I turned to leave, Dr. Bennett spoke one more time. Ms. Reynolds. I stopped and looked back. If you receive any communication, internal or external, that seems unusual. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Report it immediately, I said. She nodded once. Good. I walked out of the room, the door closing softly behind me. The hallway felt brighter, louder, normal. But nothing about this was normal anymore, because now it was clear. This wasn't just an audit. It was a case. And I wasn't just a witness. I was part of the timeline, part of the evidence. And whether I wanted to be or not, I was now positioned right at the point where everything could either fall into place or fall on me. The next few days didn't feel dramatic. There were no sudden confrontations, no urgent calls pulling me into closed rooms. If anything, everything became quieter, too quiet. At work, people still moved through their shifts, still handed off patients, still charted and clocked out. But there was a tension under it now, subtle, controlled, like everyone sensed something was happening just out of sight. I kept my routine exactly the same. I didn't ask questions I didn't need to ask. I didn't bring up the audit. And most importantly, I didn't talk about Daniel. But that didn't mean I stopped paying attention. 2 days after the meeting, I was reviewing another end-of-shift report when something new stood out. Not the same inflated numbers. Not the same supply discrepancies. This time it was a revision, a corrected entry. Someone had gone back into the system and adjusted a previously inflated record, bringing it closer to what it should have been. Not fully corrected, just less wrong. I frowned, scrolling further. There were more. Small corrections scattered across different dates. Like someone was trying to clean things up but carefully so it wouldn't look like a complete reversal. I leaned back slightly. That wasn't part of the audit process. Audits documented. They didn't quietly fix things in the background, which meant this wasn't the audit team. This was someone else. Someone who knew the audit was happening and was trying to get ahead of it. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Unknown number. I stared at it for a second before answering. Hello. Silence. Then a voice. Male, calm, controlled. You should stop looking into things that don't concern you. My grip tightened on the phone. I'm sorry. Who is this? A soft exhale on the other end. It doesn't matter, he said. What matters is that you're in a position where a misunderstanding could affect your career. There it was. Not a threat. Not directly. Just a suggestion. Wrapped in professional language. I don't know what you're referring to, I said, evenly. Another pause. Then, your name is already in the system, he said. You don't want it to be the one they focus on. The line went dead. I stood there for a moment, the phone still pressed to my ear. My name is already in the system. I lowered the phone slowly. That wasn't new information. I had seen my name in the reporting chain, but hearing it said like that, it reframed everything. They weren't just adjusting numbers. They were shaping narratives. And if they could make it look like those adjustments originated from my department, from me, then the entire situation could pivot in one direction very quickly. I walked straight to a quiet corner and opened my notes. Every timestamp, every version record, every exported file. I reviewed them again, not looking for errors but for gaps. Places where someone could twist the sequence. Places where context could be removed. That's how it worked. Not by fabricating data, but by rearranging it just enough to suggest a different story. And then I saw it. One of the entries tied to my name had a secondary approval timestamp. Minutes after my original submission. That timestamp wasn't mine, but if someone didn't look closely, it could appear as if I had approved the final version. I exhaled slowly. This was it. The setup Denise had warned me about without saying it out loud. Not obvious, not aggressive, just plausible. Enough to shift responsibility. Enough to make me the simplest explanation. I pulled up my archived files and cross-referenced the original entries. There it was. Proof that my submission had been clean. Proof that the changes came after. But proof only mattered if it was presented correctly. And at the right time. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Maya. Tell me you didn't ignore that call, she texted. I stepped into the stairwell and called her back. I got a call, I said. Yeah, she replied. You're not the only one noticing movement. What do you mean? I checked the system logs again, she said. There's activity happening outside standard audit access. Someone's modifying records. Not exactly modifying, she said. Adjusting. Cleaning. Like they're trying to make everything look less suspicious before the final review. I saw that, I said. Partial corrections. Exactly. Which tells me two things. Go ahead. One, they know the audit is serious. And two, they're trying to control what the final narrative looks like. I leaned against the wall. That call I got, I said. They mentioned my name being in the system. Maya didn't respond immediately. Then, they're testing you. For what? To see if you panic, she said. If you back off. If you stop documenting. I'm not stopping, I said. I didn't think you would, she replied. But you need to be smart about this. I am. No, she said. You're being thorough. That's different. I closed my eyes briefly. Then what do I do? Control your own timeline, she said. Make sure every piece of evidence you have is organized in a way that shows sequence, not just data order. Order. That was the key. Because without order, facts could be rearranged. With it, they told a story that couldn't be easily rewritten. I'll finalize everything tonight, I said. Good, Maya replied. And Katherine? Yeah, don't assume this is just about your brother. I opened my eyes. I don't. Because if a vendor is involved at this level, she continued, there's always someone inside making it possible. I thought about the approval chains, the layered signatures, the quiet corrections happening now. Yeah, I said. I've been thinking the same thing. We hung up shortly after. I stayed in the stairwell for a few more minutes, going over everything in my head. Daniel wasn't acting alone. He couldn't be. Which meant the person or people inside the hospital had just as much to lose, maybe more. And people with more to lose didn't usually wait for things to play out. They acted. I went back to the ICU floor, finishing my shift without drawing attention. But by the time I left that night, I had made one decision very clear in my mind. I wasn't going to let anyone define the timeline for me. Not the audit team. Not whoever made that call. And definitely not Daniel, because the moment someone else controlled the sequence of events, they controlled the outcome. And I wasn't going to let that happen. Not when I could already see how easily the story could be rewritten. All it would take was one version of the truth being accepted over another. I didn't go straight home that night. Instead, I stopped at a quiet cafe a few blocks from the hospital, one of those places that stayed open late but never felt crowded, the kind where no one asked questions if you sat in the corner with a laptop for hours. I needed space. Not to think I had already done enough of that. I needed to organize. Because Maya was right. Facts alone weren't enough. They had to be arranged in a way that couldn't be twisted. I opened my laptop and started from the beginning. Not the moment I found the discrepancies. Earlier. The first day I noticed something didn't feel right. I pulled up my saved notes, aligning them with system timestamps. Then I created a clean timeline. Day by day, entry by entry, submission time, modification time, approval chain, every piece of data in order. At first it looked like a mess, numbers, names, overlapping records, but slowly a pattern emerged. Clear, undeniable. My submissions were always consistent. The discrepancies always appeared after. And the same vendor, Reynolds Strategic Solutions, kept showing up at the exact points where the data shifted. I highlighted those moments, not emotionally, not aggressively, just precisely. Then I added something else. Emails. Every message I had sent raising questions about staffing or supply usage. Each one time-stamped. Each one unanswered or acknowledged without action. That part mattered, because it showed intent, not from me, from them. I leaned back, staring at the screen. This wasn't just evidence anymore. It was a narrative. A sequence that showed exactly what happened and when, and most importantly, who had the opportunity to change it. My phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't an unknown number. It was an email from Dr. Bennett. Subject: follow-up discussion short, direct. We'd like to meet again. Informal setting. Tomorrow evening. No location listed yet, just the time. I read it twice. Informal setting. That wasn't how hospitals usually operated, which meant this wasn't just about documentation anymore. I replied with a simple confirmation. Then I sent Maya a screenshot. She called immediately. That's not random, she said. I know. An informal meeting means they want to talk without everything being on record. Or they want to see how I handle myself outside the structure, I said. Exactly, she replied. So you need to be clear about what you bring and what you don't. I glanced at my laptop. I'm not bringing everything I said. Good. I'll bring the timeline, clean version. Nothing extra. Perfect, Maya said. And Katherine? Yeah, don't overshare. I almost smiled. That's not really my problem. I know, she said. Your problem is the opposite. You hold back too much. She wasn't wrong. I'll stick to what matters, I said. We hung up and I went back to my screen. There was one more thing I needed to check. The most recent system updates. If someone was still trying to adjust records, it would show. I logged into the portal again and navigated to the version history. And there it was. Another set of changes. Subtle, careful, but different from before. These weren't just corrections. They were shifts in sequence, timestamps adjusted by minutes, approval orders slightly rearranged, not enough to erase the discrepancies, but enough to blur the timeline. I leaned closer to the screen, because that wasn't cleanup, that was strategy. Someone wasn't trying to fix the data. They were trying to change the story of how the data moved. I quickly captured the current state screenshots, export logs, everything. Because if they were willing to adjust timestamps now, they wouldn't stop. And if I didn't preserve the original sequence, it could disappear. My chest tightened slightly, not from fear, but from clarity. This wasn't just about proving what happened. It was about protecting the version of events that showed it. I closed my laptop and sat still for a moment. Tomorrow night. Informal meeting? Dr. Bennett. Which meant one thing. She already knew this wasn't simple, and she wasn't waiting for the formal process to catch up. She was moving ahead of it. Just like someone else was trying to move ahead in the opposite direction, 2 timelines, 2 versions, and I was standing right between them. I picked up my phone and scrolled to Daniel's contact. For a second, I considered calling him, asking directly, giving him a chance to explain. But then I thought about the call I had received earlier, the quiet warning, the assumption that I might back down. And the way Daniel had talked about his work, confident, certain, untouchable. No, if he wanted to explain anything, it wouldn't be to me. It would be to the people already building the case. I locked my phone and slipped it into my bag. By the time I stood up to leave, one thing was completely clear. Tomorrow wasn't going to be about discovering new information. It was going to be about deciding which version of the truth would hold, and whether I was ready to stand behind mine when it stopped being quiet. Fan 8. Christmas Eve had always been predictable in my family. Same table, same food, same conversations looping around careers, money, and who was doing well this year. Only this time, I walked in knowing something no one else at that table understood yet. Or maybe they did. Maybe they just hadn't said it out loud. Daniel was already there when I arrived, leaning back in his chair like he owned the room. My mother was setting the table, my father flipping through channels, the background noise of holiday music filling the space. Everything looked normal, which made what I knew feel even sharper, Katherine, my mom said, smiling. You made it. Of course, I replied, setting my coat down. Daniel glanced up, his expression already carrying that familiar edge. Just got off saving lives, he asked. I didn't answer right away. I took my seat, folded my hands in my lap, and met his eyes. Just got off, I said. He smirked. Right. Work. Dinner started the way it always did. Small talk, passing plates, polite questions that didn't really invite real answers. And then, like it always did, the focus shifted to Daniel. So my father said, lifting his glass slightly, big things happening with your company. Daniel didn't hesitate. Yeah, he said. We've been restructuring some major contracts, hospitals mostly, helping them cut waste, streamline operations. My mother nodded proudly. He's making a real impact. I kept my eyes on my plate. Sounds important, I said. Daniel glanced at me, catching the tone. It is, he said. Not everyone understands how systems work at that level. There it was, the setup. And right on cue, he pushed further. You know, he added, turning slightly toward the rest of the table, people think healthcare is about compassion. It's not. It's about efficiency. If you don't manage resources right, everything collapses. I looked up at him. And how do you define managing resources? I asked. He shrugged. Making sure money isn't wasted. Even if the numbers don't reflect reality, I said calmly. The table went quiet. Just for a second. Daniel's smile didn't disappear, but it changed. What's that supposed to mean? He asked. I held his gaze. Just asking, I said. My mother cleared her throat, trying to smooth things over. Let's not turn dinner into work talk. Daniel laughed lightly. No, it's fine. I think Katherine just doesn't understand how things operate outside the ICU. There it was again. The dismissal, the assumption. And then he said it. Being a nurse is important. He continued, raising his glass slightly. But let's be honest. It's not exactly decision-making at the highest level. It's more like execution. A few quiet chuckles around the table. Not loud, not cruel, just enough. I felt the weight of it settle for a moment. Not because it hurt, but because it confirmed exactly what I had always known. They had already decided who I was. And who he was. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't need to check it. I already knew what it would be. Final audit file confirmed. Executive review complete. The same message I had seen earlier. The same timing. I placed my hand lightly over my pocket, steadying myself. And then the doorbell rang, sharp, clear, cutting through the room like a line drawn across everything. My father stood up, frowning slightly, expecting someone. No one answered. He walked to the door and opened it. There was a pause, long enough to shift the energy in the room. Then he stepped back. Can I help you?" A calm voice responded. "Yes," she said. "I believe I'm in the right place." And then she stepped inside. Dr. Olivia Bennett didn't rush. She didn't hesitate. She walked in like someone who already understood the room before she entered it. Her eyes moved once across the table and then landed on me. "Katherine Reynolds," she said, her voice even. "I'm glad you're here." No one spoke. Not my parents. Not Daniel. Just silence. Because something had just shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but permanently. Daniel sat up slightly, his confidence cracking just enough to notice. "You know her?" he asked. Dr. Bennett turned her attention to him. There was no hostility in her expression, no accusation, just clarity. "Yes," she said, "I do." A pause. Then she added, "And I've been meaning to speak with her." The room felt smaller somehow, tighter, like everything that had been separate family work assumptions was now sitting at the same table. Daniel let out a short laugh, trying to recover. "Well," he said, gesturing loosely, "this is unexpected." Dr. Bennett didn't smile back. "No," she said. "Not really." Another pause. And this time when she looked at me, there was no question in her expression. Only recognition. "Katherine," she said, "your attention to detail has been extremely valuable." My mother blinked, confused. "I'm sorry, what is this about?" Dr. Bennett shifted her gaze to her. "A review process," she said simply. "One that your daughter has contributed to in a very meaningful way." Daniel's posture changed again. Subtle, but undeniable. "What kind of review?" he asked. Dr. Bennett looked at him directly now. "The kind that requires accuracy," she said, "and integrity." The words hung in the air. Not loud, not aggressive, but precise. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Because for the first time that night, I wasn't the one being explained. I was the one being recognized. And Daniel, for the first time since I had walked in, he didn't look like the person in control of the room anymore. He looked like someone trying to understand how it had shifted, without him noticing when it started. No one reached for their glass. No one moved to pass a plate. The room stayed exactly as it was, except the balance had shifted and everyone felt it. My mother looked between me and Dr. Bennett, her smile fading into confusion. "I'm sorry," she said again, softer this time. "What kind of review are we talking about?" Dr. Bennett didn't rush her answer. "A financial and operational audit," she said, "focused on discrepancies in staffing records and supply allocation." My father straightened slightly in his chair. "That sounds serious." "It is," Dr. Bennett replied. Daniel let out a small laugh, but it didn't land the way he expected. Okay, he said, leaning forward. "And this involves Katherine." How exactly? Dr. Bennett turned her attention to him fully now. "Your sister identified patterns that required further examination," she said. Her documentation helped clarify the sequence of events. Daniel's jaw tightened just slightly. "What sequence?" he asked. I watched him carefully, not with anger, with recognition. Because this was the moment where he would decide how to position himself, deny, deflect, or shift blame. Dr. Bennett didn't answer immediately. Instead, she placed a thin folder on the table. Not dramatically, just enough to be seen. This review is still ongoing, she said. But certain findings are no longer ambiguous. My mother's voice came out sharper now. Findings about what Dr. Bennett glanced at her briefly, then back at Daniel. Vendor-linked adjustments to internal records, she said. Specifically changes that affected reported staffing and resource usage. Daniel leaned back, folding his arms. Okay, he said. And what does that have to do with me? There it was. Clean. Controlled. Like he had already prepared for this. Dr. Bennett didn't react. Your firm, she said, is listed as an authorized vendor in multiple instances tied to those adjustments. Silence. Not confusion. Not disbelief. Just stillness. Because now it wasn't abstract anymore. My father looked at Daniel. Daniel didn't look at him. He kept his eyes on Dr. Bennett. We work with a lot of clients, he said. Hospitals included. That doesn't mean we control their internal data. That's correct, Dr. Bennett said calmly. Vendors don't control internal systems. A pause. Unless they're given access through approved channels. Daniel's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. A calculation. What exactly are you implying, he asked. I'm not implying anything, she replied. I'm stating that adjustments were made through interfaces connected to your firm's contract. My mother shook her head slightly. This doesn't make sense. Daniel wouldn't. Mom Daniel cut in sharper than before. Let her finish. That shift didn't go unnoticed, because it wasn't about defending himself anymore. It was about controlling the conversation. Dr. Bennett continued, her tone steady. The issue is not that adjustments occurred, she said. It's how they occurred and how they were represented afterward. Daniel exhaled slowly. Look, he said, if there were discrepancies, that's on the hospital's internal teams. We provide recommendations. We don't manipulate data. He said it smoothly, confidently, and if I hadn't spent hours tracing those timestamps, it might have sounded reasonable. But I had. And Dr. Bennett had too. She didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She just opened the folder. Inside were a few pages, clean, organized, undeniable. She turned one toward him. This is a sequence comparison, she said. Original submission followed by post-submission adjustments. Daniel glanced down. For the first time, he didn't speak immediately. Notice the timing, she added. The initial entries were accurate. I felt my heart beat slow, not from tension, but from clarity, because I knew what came next. These modifications, she continued, occurred after the data left the originating department. She didn't look at me when she said it. She didn't need to. Daniel's eyes flicked up briefly. To clarify, he said, choosing his words carefully. You're saying someone changed the data after it was submitted? Yes, Dr. Bennett said. And you're connecting that to my company. We're connecting it to the access points associated with your company's contract. There was a difference, a precise one, and Daniel heard it, which meant he also heard what wasn't being said. Yet. He leaned back again, this time slower. That's a stretch, he said. Access doesn't mean intent. No, Dr. Bennett agreed. It doesn't. Another pause. But patterns do. The words settled into the room like weight. My father looked between them again. Daniel, is there something we should know? Daniel finally turned to him. No, he said, there's not. Too fast. Too clean. And for the first time, my mother didn't immediately nod along. She looked at him. Really looked, because something in his tone had shifted. Dr. Bennett closed the folder gently. This isn't about assigning conclusions at a dinner table, she said. There's a formal process for that. Then why are you here? Daniel asked. That was the first real crack. Not in his logic, in his control. Dr. Bennett met his gaze without hesitation. Because context matters, she said, and so does integrity. She let that sit for a moment. Then she added, your sister provided documentation that preserved the original sequence of events. My mother looked at me, confusion turning into something else. What she asked. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't defend myself. I documented what I saw. I said, that's it. Yes. Daniel let out a short breath, shaking his head. Incredible, he muttered. You really think you understand what you're looking at? I held his gaze. I understand timing, I said, and I understand when something changes after the fact. He leaned forward again. No, he said quietly. You understand your version of it. There it was. The pivot, not denial. Reframing. If you're not careful, he continued, you could be misinterpreting data in a way that puts you in the middle of something you don't fully understand. My father frowned. What does that mean? Daniel didn't answer him. He kept his eyes on me. Your name is in those records too, Katherine, he said. The room tightened again, because now it was direct, not implied, not subtle. He was moving the line, trying to redraw where responsibility sat. I didn't react immediately. I let the silence sit. Because rushing would only help him, then I spoke. My submissions are in those records, I said, not the adjustments. That's your interpretation, he replied. No, I said. That's the sequence. Dr. Bennett didn't interrupt. She didn't step in. She let it play out. Because this part mattered, not just the facts, but how they were held. Daniel leaned back again, but the confidence was thinner now. Look, he said, turning slightly toward our parents, this is exactly what I mean. She's taking partial information and building a narrative around it. My mother looked overwhelmed. I don't understand any of this. My father was quieter now, more focused. What happens next, he asked. Dr. Bennett answered, the review continues, she said, and conclusions will be based on verified documentation. Daniel nodded slowly. Good, he said, because that's exactly what we want. But his voice didn't match his words. Not anymore. Because for the first time since this started, he wasn't guiding the conversation. He was reacting to it. And that was the shift. Not loud, not dramatic, but irreversible. Because once the sequence was clear, once the order of events couldn't be changed, there was only one direction the truth could move, and no amount of confidence could move it back. The room didn't explode after that. There was no shouting, no dramatic exit, no moment where everything collapsed all at once. It unraveled more quietly than that. Dr. Bennett didn't stay long after the conversation reached its natural end. She stood, thanked my parents for their hospitality, and left with the same calm presence she had entered with. But the silence she left behind felt heavier than anything she could have said. No one touched their food. My mother sat back slowly, her hands folded in her lap like she was trying to hold on to something that no longer made sense. My father looked at the table, not at Daniel, not at me, just at the space between us. And Daniel, for the first time in years, he didn't have anything to add. No explanation, no confident wrap-up, just quiet. I picked up my coat. I should go, I said. My voice didn't shake. It didn't need to. My mother looked up. Katherine, wait. I paused. I don't understand what just happened, she said. Is your brother in trouble? I considered the question carefully, because this wasn't about winning. It wasn't about saying something that would land harder than what had already been said. It's not about trouble, I replied. It's about accountability. She frowned slightly like the word didn't sit right. Did you report him? She asked. I shook my head. I documented what I saw at work, I said. The rest followed. That distinction mattered. Because I hadn't gone after Daniel. I had followed a process, and he happened to be part of it. My father finally looked up. And you're sure about what you saw, he asked. Yes, I said. No hesitation, no explanation layered on top, just yes. Daniel let out a breath through his nose, almost like a quiet laugh, but there was no humor in it. You always did this, he said. I looked at him. Did what? Took something small and made it into something bigger, he said. I held his gaze. This wasn't small, I said. Another pause. This one different. Not tense. Just final. Because there was nothing left to argue about at that table. Not without ignoring everything that had already been laid out. I slipped my coat on. My mother stood halfway uncertain. Can we talk about this later? I nodded once. We can talk, I said, but I'm not going to explain it differently to make it easier. She sat back down slowly. That was the boundary. Not loud, not aggressive, just clear. I left the house without looking back. The cold air felt sharper than it had earlier, but it didn't bother me, because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't carrying anything I needed to prove. Weeks passed. The audit concluded quietly. No headlines, no public statements, just internal decisions that carried real consequences. Daniel's company lost its hospital contract. Further review opened into his firm's practices across other clients. I didn't follow every detail. I didn't need to. What mattered had already been established. The sequence, the access, the adjustments, and the difference between original entries and what came after. At work, things shifted too, not overnight, but gradually. Processes tightened, oversight increased, and the people who had once told me to stay in my lane stopped saying it. Not because they changed who they were, but because the lane I had stayed in turned out to be exactly where the truth was. Dr. Bennett called me into her office one afternoon. No formal meeting, just a conversation. You handled this well, she said. I followed the process, I replied. She nodded. That's harder than it sounds. There was a pause. Some people would have pushed for recognition, she added. I don't need it, I said, and I meant that. Because recognition wasn't what had been missing. Respect was, and that didn't come from one moment. It came from consistency, from doing the right thing when it wasn't convenient, when it wasn't comfortable, when it didn't benefit you immediately. At home, things were different, not fixed, not resolved, just different. My parents reached out more carefully, less certain of their assumptions, more aware of what they didn't understand. Daniel didn't call, not once, and I didn't reach out either, because some distance isn't created in a single moment. It's revealed. It's always been there, you just finally see it clearly. I didn't hate him. I didn't even feel the need to forgive him. What I felt was clarity about who he was, about who I was, and about what I was no longer willing to carry just to keep things comfortable. Christmas passed, work continued, life moved forward. And the next time someone asked me what I did for a living, I didn't explain it differently. I didn't soften it. I didn't try to make it sound more impressive. I'm a nurse, I said. And that was enough, because I knew exactly what that meant, even if it took everything that happened to make other people see it too. Some people think betrayal only counts when it's loud, when someone openly chooses against you. But sometimes it's quieter than that. It's the moment your voice is dismissed before it's even heard. It's when your work is minimized because it doesn't fit someone else's idea of success. And sometimes it's when the people closest to you don't question something because questioning it would make their world less comfortable. What I learned is that boundaries aren't about punishment. They're about clarity. They're about deciding what you will carry and what you won't, regardless of who's asking. Accountability isn't revenge. It's not about bringing someone down. It's about letting the truth stand without adjusting it to protect someone else. And forgiveness, it doesn't mean restoring access. It doesn't mean going back to the way things were. Sometimes it just means choosing not to hold on to anger while still walking in a different direction. If you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, or made to feel smaller by your own family, I'd really like to hear your story. Where are you watching from and what time is it there? And if this story stayed with you, consider subscribing. Not for me, but for more stories that remind you that quiet strength is still strength. This is a fictional story created for entertainment, education, and reflection.